don't just want the news, they want the truth. What others hide, I bring to you with evidence. Politics, corruption, human rights. No filters, no fear, just facts. I don't stop until the system shakes. Hello and welcome. I'm Makhdoom Shahabuddin and you're watching Trending Daily. Tonight we take a hard look at India in February 2026, a country that is being projected to the world as a rising global power, a future super economy and a model of stability. Yet inside India, a very different debate is growing louder. Questions about military credibility, diplomatic isolation, economic inequality, and public trust are converging into one uncomfortable reality. The gap between official narrative and lived experience is widening. The government of Narendra Modi continues to speak of a Viksit Bharat, a developed India, backed by headline figures such as strong GDP growth, falling fiscal deficit, and record-breaking stock market indexes. But beneath these numbers lies a complex and troubling picture. From youth unemployment and rural distress to rising public debt and shrinking space for small businesses, many Indians feel that growth is not translating into opportunity. At the same time, the credibility of India's military and diplomatic posture has come under strain following Operation Sindoor, launched in May 2025 after the deadly Pahalgam attack that killed 26 civilians. When Operation Sindoor was announced, it was presented as decisive, controlled, and strategically successful. National media echoed victorious language. Political leaders spoke of deterrence restored and enemies punished. But 9 months later, clarity has not emerged. Instead, what has surfaced is a series of delayed disclosures, contradictory statements, and uncomfortable admissions. Only months after the operation did India formally acknowledge that aircraft had been lost, including advanced Rafale fighters. This confirmation came from Anil Chauhan, contradicting the early impression that India had achieved overwhelming success without meaningful cost. Even more damaging was a statement by India's defense attaché to Indonesia, who revealed that political constraints limited the targeting of Pakistan air defenses. If accurate, this implies that Indian pilots were sent into hostile airspace without full operational freedom, raising serious concerns about whether political optics took priority over military prudence. The opposition seized on these revelations. Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party demanded a special parliamentary session, accusing the government of misleading the nation and hiding critical information. Instead of proactive transparency, details emerged slowly and reactively, feeding a perception that the public was being managed rather than informed. Strategically, Operation Sindoor has not produced the diplomatic leverage New Delhi appeared to expect. The Atlantic Council observed that Pakistan gained diplomatic breathing space following mediation signals from Washington. The Royal United Services Institute described India's communication strategy as reactive and lacking narrative control. A Swiss military think tank report analyzing the air engagement stirred controversy. Even analysts critical of Pakistan acknowledged that the findings did not validate India's sweeping early claims. According to post-operation assessments by The Wire, no major global power offered unequal backing for India's actions. For a country positioning itself as a rising global force, the absence of firm diplomatic support was revealing. This is not an isolated episode. Operation Sindoor fits a longer pattern. After the 2016 strikes following Uri, India described the action as surgical and decisive. Pakistan denied the scale. UN observers reported no direct observation of significant cross-border fire. Analysts later argued that raids were limited engagements rather than complex surgical operations. In 2019, after Balakot, Indian officials claimed 200 to 300 militants were eliminated. Satellite imagery from multiple international sources showed limited structural damage. Journalists who visited the site reported craters and damaged trees, but no confirmed destroyed training complex. Pakistan shot down an Indian MiG-21 during the escalation. The pattern is consistent. Bold claims, nationalist celebration, delayed clarification, limited verifiable proof. The Observer Research Foundation concluded that such strikes failed as tools of sub-conventional deterrence while succeeding in calming the domestic anger. In other words, military action becomes political messaging first. strategic outcomes second. The deeper problem is not whether India has the right to respond to terrorism. It does. The deeper problem is whether the government systematically exaggerates the outcomes, withholds the losses, and shapes perception for political advantage. When aircraft losses are acknowledged months later, public trust erodes. When casualty claims cannot be independently verified, credibility weakens. When diplomatic isolation follows military action, strategic benefit becomes questionable. Ladies and gentlemen, in a democracy that calls itself the mother of democracy, accountability is not optional. When war becomes narrative management, the damage goes far beyond the battlefield. It strikes at the credibility of the state itself. Now, let us turn to the economy. On paper, India in 2026 looks strong. GDP growth is around 7.4%. The fiscal deficit is projected at 4.4%. Stock markets are at record highs, but critics argue that is a K-shaped economy. Corporate wealth balloons, billionaires multiply. Meanwhile, the purchasing power of ordinary Indians is shrinking. The most critical failure, many argue, is youth unemployment. According to the International Labour Organization, unemployment among graduates is approaching 29%, significantly higher than among those with no formal education. In other words, education has become a liability rather than a ladder. Despite production-linked incentive schemes, manufacturing has not become the mass job creator it was promised to be. Manufacturing jobs halved between 2016 and 2021, and by 2026, the sector has still not recovered its role as an employment engine. India needs to create roughly 12 million jobs every year just to absorb new entrants. Instead, policy prioritizes capital intensive sectors like semiconductors and mega infrastructure, which generate fewer jobs per dollar invested. Rural India tells an equally bleak story. Agricultural wages have failed to keep pace with inflation. Fuel and food costs rise faster than incomes. For millions, real wages are effectively falling. Household consumption, traditionally the backbone of India's economy, is under severe strain. Growth is increasingly driven by the top 10%, while the bottom half relies on debt or government food subsidies just to survive. Then there is the debt mounting. India's total public debt, combining central and state governments, remains above 80% of GDP. Central government liabilities alone are projected to reach nearly 197 lakh crore rupees by March 2026. A staggering share of government revenue now goes to interest payments. This leaves little room for investment in healthcare and education, both of which remain far below recommended global benchmarks. Small and medium enterprises, the backbone of employment, are in a prolonged credit drought. Since demonetization and the GST rollout, MSMEs have faced compliance shocks, cash flow disruptions, and rising costs. Bank lending remains skewed toward large corporate houses. Many small firms shut down quietly, leaving workers without safety nets. Market concentration is increasing. Policy has favored national champions, massive conglomerates that dominate the sectors. Competition shrinks. Entrepreneurship suffers. Wealth concentrates. Energy adds another layer of risk. By 2026, diplomatic pressure to move away from discounted Russian crude has pushed India toward more expensive energy contracts. At the same time, the government has kept fuel taxes high to shore up revenues, effectively using energy consumers to plug fiscal gaps. Higher energy costs ripple through the entire economy, raising transport costs, food prices, and manufacturing expenses. Inflation becomes a silent tax on the poor. Put together, these trends paint a sobering picture. Yes, India has highways, airports, and skyscrapers. Yes, stock markets are booming, but millions of young people cannot find jobs. Rural families are falling behind. Small businesses are struggling to survive. Public debt is rising. Inequality is widening. Add to this the credibility questions raised by Operation Sindoor and the diplomatic unease that followed, and a pattern emerges. This is a government strong on narrative, strong on symbolism, strong on spectacle, but increasingly weak on transparency, accountability, and inclusive growth. The question for India in 2026 is no longer whether it can project power or growth. The question is whether it can rebuild trust. Trust that military actions are honestly presented. Trust that economic growth will create real opportunities. Trust that institutions serve citizens, not political messaging. Until that trust is restored, the promise of a Viksit Bharat will remain a slogan, not a lived reality. And the longer the gap between narrative and truth persists, the deeper the credibility crisis will become. This is Makhdoom Shahabuddin. You are watching Trending Daily. See you in the next episode.